There's all sorts of bodily based practices, including the form of effective and transformative gentle yoga that's taught at Nyingma Institute that's called Kumne, which if you haven't tried it, they have a Sunday drop-in that you can do that I've done many times. That's just wonderful. You could, no background, you can just come in on a Sunday online and do a little very gentle yoga, which is significantly different than the way yoga may be done in other places. If you've been to yoga studios, this is, I won't go too much into detail, but it's worth checking out. So practices related to body, practices related to mind, practices related to breath and energy, are just some of the various practices we may encounter. Then there are contemplations, such as contemplating, ooh, I may not be around forever. So then how do I best want to use my time? Or contemplating, um, when I pursue these kinds of activities or desires, it continually leaves me frustrated and dissatisfied, and maybe leaves me tuned out from being responsive to other people, diminishes my energy. And when I engage in these other kinds of activities and actions and thoughts, then somehow I'm more responsive to other people and have more energy and more positive energy. These kinds of contemplations, that's also a form of meditation. So, all right, I've named a bunch of examples from the variety of practices. And I'll back up one step and just say that, as many of you know, meditation is just one facet. It's just one part or aspect of a much more comprehensive path that is part and parcel of Buddhist tradition. So within the tradition here at Nyingma Institute, um, then the aim is to really understand the nature of our being, understand what we are, how our bodies, minds, hearts, consciousness work, what it means to be a person in the world. And through understanding that, how can we clear away our limitations, whatever is capable of being cleared away, bring forth our positive potential, whatever is capable of being brought forth, and maximally benefit ourselves and the world around us with caring in our heart. How do we live a life of caring and then enact that in whatever way we choose? There are countless ways that we can enact a life of caring. There isn't a single prescription there. But if we have the motivation and we have the understanding and we have the qualities coming forth, then our caring life can bring benefit to ourselves and our world, however that happens. So this is part of the larger picture of the aim of the path. Meditation in the Nyingma tradition is not merely to relax. It's not merely to take a break from the stress of our lives. All of that is necessary and useful. We can't really be helpful to ourselves or others if we're terribly stressed. Um, so those are important skills. But the overall vision is much more comprehensive. It's about transforming ourselves and our world, our society, our world at large, and really benefiting all beings without limit. So as our understanding grows, then our understanding of what this means and what is possible also deepens. Um, Another little piece of background before go back into meditation is just for those of you who are quite new, when we say Nyingma tradition or Nyingma Institute, what are we talking about? What is this Nyingma? In brief, Buddhism begins about 2,500 years ago in India as this tradition for bringing the positive sort of individual and societal transformation that I just mentioned. And eventually, um, by the 700s CE, Buddhism is moving from India across the Himalayas into Tibet. It's one of the last places in Asia that Buddhism goes because it's very arduous to cross the Himalayas. Um, and so when Buddhism is transmitted the full flowering, every stage of development that has occurred in Indian Buddhism gets transmitted in the 700s into Tibet. That initial transmission or that original transmission is what is called the Nyingma tradition. So the Tibetan Nyingma tradition carries on the full range of all of the developments and understanding of Indian Buddhism that had been happening for 12 or 1300 years already before it moves into Tibet. And then in Tibet, all of these great female and male masters continue to elucidate and elaborate and further develop the tradition they inherited from India down to the present day. So it's a very vital, constantly uh, changing tradition because the essence remains the same, but our outer situation is always changing. So the presentations of the teachings always need to be adjusted to speak to us where we are and how our society is right now. That's different than how it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So in that sense, the presentations are always changing and new, although the essence remains the same. So that's a little bit about the Nyingma tradition. Um, and when the Nyingma tradition, when all of these practices were inherited from 12 or 1300 years of development in India, in Tibet in the 700s, and then they continued to be developed, we have a wide range, a wide variety of approaches and techniques for transformation. Meditation doesn't refer to just one thing, right? Sometimes we hear about mindfulness and then we think, oh, meditation is mindfulness. Or we hear about breathing to calm ourselves and we think that's what meditation is. Or we think meditation is we're supposed to continually be aware of what's going on in our minds every moment. And so we get a little uptight, constantly monitoring every second what's going on in our minds. These are all narrow views of meditation, and meditation refers to much more than that. So if we have a broader sense of what we're talking about, then we're not so apt to be caught in these small views of meditation and then make ourselves uptight by trying to perpetuate one particular technique. Instead of understanding there's a range of techniques for unveiling the positivity within us that's already there. Um, so now a little more detail about types of meditation for about 10 or 15 more minutes, then we can discuss. And I'm going to, maybe when I'm done talking, I may show a bit of a document. I created a document today. Maybe it could have been more concise, but I just put it together on the fly today and with some nice images and plenty of spacing, it's about 20 pages. So I'm going to put that in the chat and you can download it. And I'm going to kindly ask Hyun to also email that out to everybody who signed up for the Dharma talk today. So you can get that document and goes into a lot more detail about what I'm briefly speaking about now and has quotes and has book titles and recommendations and so on. So one classification or categorization related to meditation that I'd like to present for us is a categorization in which, on the one hand, there are practices that involve intention and some sort of conceptual engagement, conceptual structuring, or conceptual mediation. There's something happening that's taking place through concept in some way, conceptual mind. And this can be subtle or overt. It can be like very overt and obvious. For example, I think about how others feel pain and distress and want to be happy just like me. And I form a wish that they may find this happiness and safety that they wish for, just the same as I wish for it. All of that, it involves ideas, concepts, emotion. So it's obviously conceptual in some way, right? And then conceptual practice can be subtler. For example, anytime that our awareness or attention is holding on to some sort of standpoint, anytime that we are holding a standpoint, that we are fixated or stuck on a certain point of reference or point of view, that is subtle conception. That's conceptuality. So, for example, if we are observing experience and the falling away of how experience arises, just within the field of experience, how it arises and falls away, and we're not really thinking about anything. We're just, sensations are arising and passing away. They're being observed in awareness. Sounds and sights are rising and passing away. Thoughts are rising and passing away. But if there's a sense of looking, a sense of observing, that's conceptual. Okay, so that is a little subtler than the sort of overt thinking. Oh, this person, Joan, wants to be happy just as I do. May she be happy? How can I speak or think in ways that might add to her happiness instead of adding to her distress? Right. Both types of conceptual practice, one obvious and one a little subtler. So on the one hand, there are conceptual practices, and these always involve some kind of intention, whether it's overtly, whether we're overtly aware of it or not. Um, there's always some sort of agenda of some kind of project where we're going from here to somewhere else. That just may be like building understanding. Like, for example, there might be a practice where we're asked to observe when an emotion arises, where does that emotion go? So when we're feeling some upset, just agitation, where does the agitation go moment by moment as it starts to disappear? There's some kind of wish or project there to see something. We want to see, where does this agitated emotion go to? So that's what we call a from to orientation. We're trying to go from where we are right now, which is being caught up in the agitation, to an understanding of how agitation dissolves and it's changing. And we don't have to be fused with it so that it causes us unhappiness. We can be more spacious so that agitation can arise in a spaciousness within us and disappear in a spaciousness within us and not necessarily cause any agitation whatsoever. And in fact, can start to naturally transform and unveil its underlying energy, which may be quite different than the surface level of what we call agitation altogether. There may be a positive energy hidden there if we don't cling to it. But this observation of agitation that I'm using as an example, we're trying to gain some insight or understanding. So we're trying to go from where we are now to somewhere else. In this case, a greater understanding of the nature of agitation so that we can become a little more free. So that's what we call a from and to orientation. And conceptual practices always have this structuring without exception. So I've made one categorization so far, and that's conceptual practices of different kinds and different degrees of subtlety. In contrast to that whole categorization of conceptual practice, I'd like to present a different categorization, which is non-conceptual and effortless being. Non-conceptual and effortless being. So in one of his early books called Hidden Mind of Freedom, Tarthang Tulku, the Tibetan teacher trained in Old Tibet before it underwent great tumultuous changes. In one of his early books, Hidden Mind of Freedom, he talks about natural being. And in another early book called Gesture of Balance, he talks about the natural state of meditation. So natural being or the natural state of meditation. Or sometimes he just talks about natural awareness. Okay. In other books that are part of a different series with a different way of presenting and speaking about teachings, books called Time, Space, and Knowledge, sometimes he'll talk about great knowledge or knowingness. All of these, this natural being, natural state of mind, natural state of meditation, open awareness, great knowledge, knowingness. These are all synonymous to a large extent. They mean the same thing. And they're pointing to a different category or way of being that we can call meditation, which does not involve effort and it does not involve intentionality. There's no agenda. We're not trying to go from somewhere to somewhere else when we're talking about this other category of natural being. I'm just going to refer to this effortless non-conceptuality from here on out as natural being. So instead, what this involves is a total letting be, simply being, just being, so that everything can arise within experience. Nothing is repressed or stopped or hindered. Thoughts, sights, sounds, what we take to be the environment and so on, all of this still arises. Appearances still happen. Experience, so to speak, still occurs. But when the identification with it or the clinging to it or the ideas about it drop away and there's no longer any effort to manipulate what is occurring, what is appearing, there's just a letting be in the dynamic presentation of life that we can call natural being. That's something quite different than the conceptual practices. And when there's that effortless just being, because we're not contriving, we're not manipulating, we're not constructing anything, we're not trying to say what's happening right now is no good and we have to make it better. We've dropped all of that, right? There's a simple resting or being in a flow of freedom. Because of that, it's then possible for qualities or a quality of being that's beyond the manipulative ego-based mind to shine forth. As long as I'm caught up in enacting my agendas of I have to manipulate my experience to somehow make it better, whatever possibility there may be for something beyond my manipulative ego agenda to shine forth, it can't shine forth. It's being obscured or blocked by my ongoing engagement with manipulation to get rid of this and instead get that. I want to get rid of this feeling and get that feeling. This is how we normally operate. And we take these patterns often into our meditative practice. So just like in life, it's like, I don't want that food, yuck. I want this food, yum. We take this into our meditation and we start manipulating our meditative practice to engineer it for certain experiences and get rid of other kinds of experiences, sometimes unwittingly. And this stands in the way of that which lies beyond the ordinary contrived mind to shine forth. That which lies beyond the ordinary contrived mind is going to remain hidden in the background. It's going to remain a hidden mind of freedom, as the title of Tarthang Tulku's book points out, as long as we're involved in that sort of manipulation. Now, this is a little bit tricky because conceptual practices that involve intention and effort are very, very necessary at many stages along the path. And for many of us, like myself as an example, most of the practices that I do, and I engage in practices every day throughout the day, both in a formal way and in the midst of daily life. And most of the practices that I do involve intention and some kind of effort. And that's fine. And I'm doing that knowingly because it's helpful for me on the path. And then a little bit, some other practices that I do involve just a complete letting be. No effort whatsoever. Just, we might say, total relaxation or complete resting, right? Now, the preponderance of these two, like the relative emphasis, how much should we just let be with no effort, and how much should we engage in effortful practices? That is a question that we have to answer each for ourselves based on our own dispositions, our own experience, where we are on the path, what it is that we're trying to work on in particular along the path. All of that's going to determine how much of our practice time is spent in just effortless resting versus practices that have a particular aim and are therefore conceptual and intentional. Okay. But a couple of more words about that, a couple of like warnings from the great masters, and then maybe I'll show a quote or two, then we can have discussion. First of all, many of these so-called intentional effort-based practices, they are very, very useful for us because they can promote positive energy, a positive way of being, a type of protection within our being that helps us to be very happy. It helps us to be resilient. It helps us to be open, flexible, and responsive. We can deal with great hardships. And the more that we practice, the more that hardships are going to come our way and test us. That's how this works. This happens naturally. It's a natural process of purification. And so relying on various practices that build positive qualities and clear away afflicted, disturbing, detrimental kinds of qualities can be very helpful as a basis, a platform. They also, because they make us so stable and they make us happy, it's a natural leaping off point once we have that stability and happiness to really enter into a deeper sort of letting be or resting. The idea that if I am plagued by a disturbed mind much of the time with all kinds of disturbing emotions and thoughts that constantly grip my attention moment by moment, the idea that I'm going to go from that sort of a way of being immediately into a deep resting in the ultimate nature of being is probably not practical. Theoretically, it's always possible to touch the nature of being. But practically speaking, for most of us, if you're ordinary like I am, it's just not going to happen. We need this positive basis of stability so that then when we entrust ourselves to the flow of experience, the ordinary conceptual mind is ready to let be and release. If we're plagued by a lot of unhappiness, that's reinforcing a sense of self. And then we can't release because we're stuck in a sense of self. Okay, so that's one comment about the usefulness of these kinds of conceptual practices. And let me specify a few. Examples of these kinds of positive conceptually based practices would be love, developing loving kindness toward ourselves and toward others. Developing joy. So this might have to do with bodily yoga, that we're doing certain kinds of kumne bodily yoga. Joyful feeling comes. We focus lightly on that joy and encourage it to expand. So that's a conceptual practice. There's a part of our being that is aware of the joy and encouraging it to expand. So there's a type of witnessing and a type of object. In this case, the object is a bodily feeling of joy that expands beyond our body into the whole surrounding environment. This is part of Kumne yoga practice. But that has tremendous positive effects. It's well worth doing. It doesn't matter that it's structured by subject and object, a knower and what is known, a doer who's doing something. That's fine. That's our starting point. That's where we are. We're in that sort of structuring of I'm a knower, I'm a doer, I'm a subject experiencing life. So we're going to use that structuring in conceptual meditation to build positive qualities. Then we're going to investigate that sort of structuring. Wait a minute. What really is the sense of self? What really is the knower that's arising in experience? Is it as independent, as solid as we have thought it is or not? What really are the objects of experience that are appearing through the senses and then the mental field? Are those also as independent and solid and completely apart from our awareness as we may have thought previously or not? We can do all kinds of investigation. This also involves a type of conceptuality. This helps us gain a clarity that the sense of a subject or a knower is appearing as a feature of our experience. And the sense of the objects known by the knower that we call us or I, those objects are also a feature of experience. And it's all held within a larger field of experience or knowing that is not structured by any appearing knower or any appearing objects that are known. We can get in touch with this through analysis. And this analysis doesn't have to be really philosophical. Right? We don't have to use strange terms from Sanskrit or Tibetan. We don't have to be philosophers. We can just learn to investigate. And there's all kinds of instructions, pithy instructions for how to investigate our experience throughout the books of Tarthang Tulku, for example, that anybody can access and utilize without being some fancy philosopher. And then, as we have revealed how our attention previously has been stuck, how it's been fixated or fused or identified, it's been fused with a sense of self, it's been fused with objects that appear. We think that's me, or those objects are mine. The sense of self is the I, or it's me. Then maybe we've seen through the sense of self, we realize the sense of self is an image that's being constructed moment by moment, but we still might be attached to a sense of mind. We might think, oh, but there's an impersonal mind. There's a stream of mind, and we might be attached to that. So then that needs to be investigated. How solid and really bounded or discrete is this so-called stream of mind, our stream of experience? On the one hand, we have our streams of experience. I see all of you on the screen. We're in different squares. You have your memories, and we're going to all go away from this and go our separate ways. But that's one level that we call the ordinary or relative. But on the other hand, through investigation, we start to discover there's a deeper level within experience that we all share, where that separation is not the final word, where really there is a type of inseparability among one another and among everything that appears that we can experience. It's not something we need to believe in or think about. We can experience it. We can touch this sort of inseparability. That's at a deeper level that we call an ultimate level. So analysis and conceptual practices, they can do many things for us. They clear away hindrances. They show us where we're stuck so we can release the stuckness. And then we're better positioned to just rest or release into natural being, this uncontrived way of being beyond any concepts. And they provide all this resilience, okay, as well as guidance for just how to live a decent life in the world. You know, a life that's non-harming and helpful and has deep meaning and purpose. So these kinds of practices are not to be like belittled or tossed away. In fact, there are famous admonitions within the tradition. A very great teacher, Tilopa from India, told his student Naropa, who was deeply realized, like, you know, well on the way to what we would call awakening or enlightenment. He said, you know, my heart son, never until you are fully awakened and there's no negativity left whatsoever, never abandon fully the practice of actively cultivating positive qualities, positive force. Always keep doing that along with the non-conceptual, uncontrived, unfabricated, just being that at that point Naropa was already very familiar with. We need both, an alternation, okay? The last little admonition or caution about all this is, it may sound really wonderful if somebody says, oh, just relax. And now Tarthang Tulku, for whom I have the greatest respect and admiration, in many of his books, he'll write things like, we just need to relax. But when he writes that, it's preceded by, and it's followed by a lot of explanation and pointing out of how we're stuck, so that when we relax, we can release the stuckness. But if we don't through other practices, understand how we're stuck, and then we just relax. When I just relax, I'm just relaxing in a vague, feels a little cozy level of ordinary mind. Um, that's kind of like dark and maybe a little spacious, a little blank. That may feel relaxing because it's a little like it's not so active from our hectic lives. But there's no transformative knowledge there. There's no transformative love or knowing within that sort of relaxation. It's fine as a stress reduction kind of method, but that's not what's meant when there are deep, profound instructions saying all we need to do is just relax. What's meant when we encounter those instructions is we need to release every fixation that we have. That means all of our attachment to being somebody, to being something, to being a knower. That means we're no longer trying to know. That means we're trusting a knowing that's already present within us, that we don't manufacture, that is not narratively reporting on what's going on. So that sort of relaxation, it's much deeper than our ordinary sense of just relax. This is why we need these other practices, including different kinds of analysis, so that we can really learn the meaning of just relax. Otherwise, when we say we're relaxing, we're not relaxing. We're resting in a level of fixation and stuckness that we're not presently aware of. We're just resting in stuckness, and we're calling it relaxing. But that's not total relaxing. Okay. So some of these instructions can sound very simple, but there's really a profundity behind them. And it takes time for us to start to uncover the profundity, right? And as we start to see how profound these instructions are and what's involved, then we start to see how far, like someone, myself, how far I am from this being able to consistently, deeply, in a sustained way, just relax. You know, maybe little moments which are worthwhile and to be encouraged, but that's not the same as spending hours or days on end in a completely open, non-conceptual state. That would be something else altogether, and that's not as easy as it sounds. So I brought up a bunch of things. I don't want to take too much time, yeah, because I want time for discussion. So I'm going to just let you look at quotes on my handout when you get the handout, and I put my email on there. If there's things you don't understand, you want to email me, I'll get back to you eventually. The next week or two is a little busy for me, but after that, I have a fair amount of time. So if you're patient, I'll get back to you. And rather than share screen and go through a bunch of quotes, let me just sum up in a sentence or two what I was trying to put forth. First of all, meditation is part of a much more comprehensive path for positively transforming our lives and our society. It's not the end all be all. It's a facet of transformative path. Second of all, there's many types of meditation done for different purposes. Conceptual types of meditation are structured somehow by a subject knowing an object in one way or another, and some kind of intention that is being undertaken by a knowing subject or a witness or an observer or a looker. It still has vital use, as I've tried to demonstrate. And on the other hand, there are different other kinds of practices or practice that in a way is a non-practice because it doesn't involve effort. It's dropping into effortless being, which is always already present, but is obscured by our involvement in our effortful manipulation of experience. So in letting go of our effortful manipulation of experience, we can drop into an already present, unmanufactured, effortless level of being and get to taste what comes from there, which is something quite different than the machinations and imaginings of our ego. In one book, maybe his most recent book, I guess, Gesture of Great Love, at one point Tarthang Tulku says, imagine the light of 1,000 suns lighting up everywhere. Now you're getting a little closer to what that sort of shining forth beyond the manipulative mind might feel like experientially. So those are just some ways to classify practices. And what I didn't really go into, I'll just mention it, is I've mentioned analysis, but what I haven't really mentioned is there are other sorts of practices that involve conception and intention that are meant to stabilize our attention, to help us to be non-distracted. In other words, to concentrate. But concentration doesn't always mean concentrating on an object, doesn't mean we have to concentrate on the breath or concentrate on a mantra or visualization. It can be that, but concentration can just be non-distraction. It just means presence, natural presence without distraction. That's also a type of concentration. So there are all kinds of practices that we might do to stabilize our attention. For various reasons, it helps us with our life in practical ways. We can accomplish what we want when we have stable attention. But also, how can I rest or be in natural being and not be jerked around and pulled and identified with every passing thought or sensation that comes around unless I've developed a degree of non-distraction, which is an ability to be present while thoughts and other occurrences are happening, but they don't pull attention. This is what we mean by non-distraction. So this is something that often requires its own cultivation to some extent. So these are all practices you may encounter, and this is how they all kind of fit together. They either help us build the qualities that we desire and clear away the qualities that are impeding us, or there's natural being, just resting in what we really are. So I hope that's helpful. I'm interested in hearing your questions, your observations. Maybe you have clarifications or objections. So I'm going to open it up. Now, let me see if I can, before people have to leave, let me see if I can put my document into the chat. Can someone tell me how I do that really quickly? Let's see, file.
Wasn't it open on our computer with Cass?
What, take my file? Can I just drag it into the chat?
Yeah, let's try that.
Let me see. 1 sec. And then if I can't do this in a moment, then no big deal because Hyun can send it out.
I can send all of.
Yeah, and we're not going to really look at it right now anyway. Transfer of files is restricted by your account admin. So I'll give it to Hyun and she'll kindly send it out later.
Let's
So
do
then
that.
you're going to see quotes there from Longchenpa and Mipham, which is kind of what I advertised and promised, rather than hearing from me. But I was paraphrasing, trying to paraphrase the essential points that they're making in their quotes on this document that you're going to get. So hopefully it'll make sense. You have an intro now to what Longchenpa and Mipham, great masters of the Nyingma tradition, two of many, are saying there. So with that said, thanks for your attention, and let me hear from you. You can just either use an icon to raise your hand, or you can just unmute and throw out a question. We can have some back and forth. So please, what's on your mind? Yeah, go ahead, George.
First of all, it's extremely nice to see you again, Dr. Goldstein, and thank you so much for the opportunity. My question is, I always found the practice of visualization in Buddhist meditation as something meaningless, since our imagination is shaped by our thoughts and knowledge and experience, which is limited. So I don't think they carry something really deep, fundamental significance in meditation practice. But at the same time, I understand that it is a very important part, such as Shenrezig practice, is a part of Tantra. So my question is, if I reject this practice of visualization, does it mean that I reject a very important part of Tibetan Buddhist tradition? Or maybe this is something like, as you have mentioned, conceptual, which we need on the basis level, and we can start from it. Or does this visualization have more like significance, or it's just basic level? Thank you.
Great to see you, George. George was a student in my class at Harvard and is now volunteering at a center in California for the summer, right? One of Tarthang Tulku's centers, Ratnaling in California. And yeah, so happy to see you after a long time. That's a deep question, and there's a lot there. So I'm going to give a brief answer, and maybe another time you and I can chat about it. Happy to chat about it more at length. So as George is saying, there are practices of visualization, of generating images with our mind and then relating to these images and focusing on these images. And there's so much background understanding that goes into that so that it would be meaningful and make sense and we would understand the significance. And that is not going to be possible for me to sum up the range of that essential background understanding in a few minutes right here. I'll say a few things. One thing is I heard you talking about thoughts and concepts. And on the one hand, you were expressing what the tradition would consider to be a worthwhile skepticism or questioning about the ultimate value of the content or the messages of any given thoughts. Okay. That the kind of understanding that we're ultimately aiming for in this sort of tradition is really beyond thought, but thought is a bridge and a gateway not to be rejected. However, the energy of thought, the energy of any mental arising, thought, emotion, concept, anything that's arising in the mental sphere is a part of our being. It's a radiance of our being. And when we relate to the energy or the arising, the dynamic arising of thoughts, emotion, concept, imagining, memory, other mental arisings, in terms of their dynamic energy, rather than in terms of their conceptual content, instead of buying into the story they're telling about the world and about ourselves, when we can touch the moment by moment dynamism of their arising energy, then we see that they are expressions of our deeper nature and they are gateways to resting in our deeper nature. So we're not trying to stop thought, and we're also not trying in a way to denigrate thought. What we want to be careful of is mistaking the conceptual claims of thought. This is what I am. This is what the world is. This is how this person is. This is why I should like or should not like him or her. Those are all conceptual messages. That we want to be skeptical of. That we want to question. But the energy of thought itself is a vital part of our being. And so we want to make that distinction, first of all. There's a great value of thought. Secondly, there is just using language loosely. what I'm about to say, we would need to investigate and discover this for ourselves. So I'm not asking you to go along with me. This isn't a faith-based class, right? I'm not asking for your faith in anything. I'm just speaking from experience. And as a beginner student, but nonetheless, telling you straight, there is a realm beyond the ordinary mind, a realm of experience, beyond ordinary ego mind and beyond concept. And that realm, so to speak, is full of tremendous positive qualities and positive energy. And that's part of our deeper being. It's not my being, so to speak, or George's being. It's just being, right? We are an expression of that deeper being. And that deeper being is constantly trying to communicate itself to our level of awareness. And when we visualize a form of an awakened presence, such as the embodiment of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, or Chenrezig in Tibetan that George referred to, which could be depicted in many different ways as the tradition realizes. It's going to be depicted in culturally specific ways. It's a cultural, conceptual depiction, but it's a gateway. It's a representation of an energy and a quality that is present in being. In whose being? In all of our being, in the nature of all of our being. Right? That we can get in touch with. And by learning to relate to certain images, it puts us in touch with the qualities that those images represent, if we've become familiar with the symbolic system. So that may or may not be something that we want to do, becoming familiar with that symbolic system and relating to those images as a way of communicating with and bringing forth deeper qualities like awakened compassion and awakened knowing and so forth. There are other ways to bring forth awakened compassion and awakened knowing and similar positive qualities without relating to those sorts of images within visualization and tantric practice. So is it absolutely essential? No. Is it essential to get in touch? For transformation, is it essential at some point to get in touch with the deeper nature of our being and its positive potentials? Heck yes, that's what we want to do. That's what's amazing and wonderful. Okay, but it doesn't have to happen through visualization. You see, the visualization, it seems like it's happening through the effortful construction of our conceptual mind, but there's a deeper way of relating to and understanding visualization where it's happening as a natural expression of our deeper being beyond the ego conceptual mind. And where our deeper level of being is expressing itself through these specific culturally constructed forms that we can relate to. And if that speaks to us and we can relate to that, it can be very powerful. Because really we're getting in touch with being with a capital B, right? And while there are differences among different traditions, I do not want to flatten them all out in the same way. There is a sense in which when Christians, Muslims, and Jews are talking about God and the nature of God, and Buddhists are talking about the nature of being, we're not necessarily talking about something different experientially. Okay. The way we phrase this may be importantly different, and that can have implications, right? So these traditions are a little bit different, but they may also be pointing to similar truths. Okay. So just as Christians, let's say, may relate to a certain image and pray to that image of that saint or that image of Mary, Buddhists may relate to an image that's an aspect of awakened being and pray to that because we're stuck at a level where we feel separate. But by praying to that and relating to that, we overcome this false sense of separation and we discover we're not separate. And we discover that is just a symbol for something that is part of our being that really can't be fully symbolized at all, right? The picture of Avalokiteshvara or the picture of Manjushri, the embodiment of knowledge, or the picture of Padmasambhava, that's not what Padmasambhava ultimately is. Padmasambhava is that and much more beyond concept, right? The nature of being, the ultimate nature of goodness. Now, this may sound like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but first we have to start out by getting in touch with our limitations and what's going on in experience now. When we see what's going on in experience and we can release from it, other aspects of experience come to the forefront that were hidden from us. And then we can talk about them from our experience. And then you don't have to listen to someone like me saying, hey, this could be possible. You can just know it. So I hope that helps a little bit.
It was a perfect answer for me. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure. But I'll say this, Tarthang Tulku in his books, he is presenting a lot of the highest teachings in many respects. And he's doing it in what seems like a simple way through simple language, but it's extremely profound. And he's not presenting the details of tantric practice in books like Gesture of Great Love or Gesture of Balance or Revelations of Mind or Lotus Mind or, caring. But there's very profound practices that come from some of the highest levels of the tradition, not necessarily involving all the visualization and mantra and so forth. Because those are helpful, but they're not absolutely essential to uncover the nature of our being. Okay. Other comments, questions, objections?
Elon, I from the Nyingma Institute in Berkeley, Olivia here. Some of us have to leave now, but I just wanted to thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful presentation on so many levels, and I so deeply appreciate your continued connection to us. So
Thank you so much. Good to see you. And, Olivia's been organizing these talks for a number of years. I don't know how long. It's taken a lot of work. And so I want us, just to acknowledge that and thank you, right? Because I believe you're passing the baton. Yeah. So thanks. Really appreciate it. And yeah, anyone who needs to leave, that's fine. You'll get this handout later on, which has my email on it, should you want it. If you have some other questions. But I'll stick around a while longer, another 15 minutes at least. Nobi, where are you, Nobi? Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute.
Yeah, still in Bangkok, Thailand.
It's the middle of the night for you, right?
No, it's no, in the morning. It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's already early morning. Okay.
Yeah, and
Wow.
thank you for the talk. I thought it's always wonderful. Now you talked about two different kinds of relaxation. The relaxation being in awareness itself, and the relaxation that you said resting in our structure, right? So my question is, how do I know that I am operating in awareness itself, in that relaxed, letting go of complete, letting go of the state versus the other mundane relaxation? How do I know? Thank you.
So first of all, good to see you. I'm trying to think, maybe the last time I saw you was like at a intro to TSK class, like
Yes,
3 years ago,
that was
perhaps.
wonderful. Yes.
So nice to see you. And you've come up in my thoughts since then, wondering how you are. This is again, a profound and a complex question that Nobi's bringing up, because when we're resting and letting go of concept, part of that resting involves not reporting to ourselves about what's going on. That's what part of that resting by definition entails. So if we're not reporting to ourselves about what's going on, we're not kind of spying about what's happening and then making a commentary on it, then there is this question of how can we differentiate the sort of state that we've been in? And this gets a bit subtle, but fortunately, there's an intrinsic quality of knowing that's part of our being, that it's not made by us. It's already here. It's what we are. We heard a sound, and that hearing was effortless in a sense. Unfortunately, one of my dogs, who's supposed to be asleep upstairs, heard the sound too. Now she's barking. Oops. But the point is there's an intrinsic, already present natural ability to know. In this case, it's the ability to hear. That's a form of knowing that we call hearing. There's other forms of knowing that we might think are more explicitly mental. But so there's this intrinsic quality of knowing. This is called svasamvedana in Sanskrit, for those of you who know that, or rangrik in Tibetan. It's often translated as reflexive awareness, right? Or intrinsic knowing. And the point is, it doesn't require a special separate effort from us to analyze and know in order for knowing to happen. There's a simple form of knowing that occurs effortlessly, naturally, when we just allow it and tune into it. Thanks to that, when we emerge from a resting state, afterward, there's a knowing that is aware of some features of what was happening in that resting state. We don't, while resting, we don't need to analyze and say, what's going on? Am I really resting? Am I not resting? Am I caught in structure? Am I just identified, with a form of kind of subtler conceptuality that seems a little spacious? We don't really have to check as we're resting, because when we emerge from it, either our little bell goes off or whatever, but we've ended the session, there's a knowing that can look back and it can know a bit what was going on because the intrinsic knowing was already there. Okay, so that's the good news, is that we can reflect about it introspectively after the fact. But I think there's other markers, which are that the great teachers tell us, if there's authentic resting in the deep nature of being, then there will, over the long term, meaning over weeks or months, there will be a notable increase in love, humility, feelings of gratitude and inseparability, lightness, even palpable experiences of what feel like light, like the light of 1,000 suns within our experience of resting. That can be part of it. And so a type of knowing that involves knowing inseparability, knowing an intimate non-separation from other people and our world. And along with that, a type of love and a type of freedom that leads to compassion, that when we see others who are in pain and anguish, there's a natural compassion. When these are emerging notably more strongly, these are signs that there's resting in the ultimate nature. When we feel like we're resting, but we're sort of tuned out, we're a little like spaced out, and we come out of it, and then we feel like other people are bugging us. They're a bother. We'd like to go back to our peaceful resting. That's a sign that we're like resting in some kind of concentration bubble, some kind of manufactured concentration cave. And there's a lot of levels to this that we can drop into, right? In Sanskrit terminology, we call this the foundation consciousness. The foundation consciousness, not of awakening, the foundation consciousness of confusion. It's the foundation of confusion, and it can feel vast and non-conceptual, but if we feel a little aloof, a little superior, rather than feeling more humble, again, that's a sign that we're resting in the confused samsaric foundation consciousness, not in the genuine ultimate nature. So these are all signs, and it's understood that the positive force that gathers within our being through doing the effortful conceptual practices, such as love, like sending love out to ourselves and everyone, and sending compassion out to ourselves and everyone, and wishing to become a better servant to our whole world, starting with the people that we're closest to on a daily basis, right? Not getting too abstract to everybody out there, but like starting with the people we see every day and the people we live with, first and foremost, trying to be better, kinder servants. That sort of positive energy empowers our being to rest more easily in natural being. So if we're not resting in natural being, then doing practices of offering, of giving, of visualizing light, of peaceful acceptance, of loving kindness can build the positive power so that we then can rest in natural being. Part of the issue is we lack the positive force. Positive force is punya. It's sunam in Tibetan. It's what in English gets translated as merit, but that's a really poor translation. Because this isn't merit that comes from God. This is positive force that's part of the nature of our being that we tap into and strengthen. So this positive force is really important, this punya, this merit. Other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Hi, this is Josefa. I'm from I stay at the Nyingma Institute. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, sir. For me, I've been kind of getting into the realm of meditation from the standpoint of focusing on my breathing, you know, and I've been using that as a tool to kind of how do I reduce the amount of breaths I take in a particular segment of time, you know, and so that I can kind of get into that state of calmness, which I think is a way to meditate, I presume. And I guess it can also kind of helps me to get a better night's sleep as well, you know. So meditation, sleeping well is, I think, is also a form of meditation for me. So I'm just trying to figure out that when I'm sitting upright and doing this meditation, sometimes there comes a point where you feel like you are going to kind of get lost somewhere and you don't know where you're going, and suddenly you kind of try to bring yourself back into that awareness. And I don't know whether that's a conceptual framework or non-conceptual framework, and how does one kind of let go of that what do you call uncertainty, you know, of what's going to happen beyond that. And I did hear you mentioned about a bell, you know, which you ring a bell which brings you back to that state of out of meditation. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to place these ideas to make it a more holistic understanding of how do you approach meditation, you know. Thank you.
Thank you, and nice to meet you. I'll try to respond a little bit, you know, but then please take whatever I say kind of tentatively as maybe just a starting point to chew on, because we'd have to have a much more in-depth conversation for me to really be able to address your questions better. And then even then I might or might not have the capacity to address your particular questions. It might just be beyond anything that I can offer. But here's a few maybe starting points to think about, or that what you're saying, you know, sounds worthwhile of building relaxation and calmness and inner peace through connecting with breath. So that all of that, as with many of these intentional methods, it has a positive outcome and a positive use. But, so there are caveats, right? But, so that's fine. You don't need to stop that. I'm not suggesting one way or another. You continue if it's useful to you. But we need to keep in mind that that sort of practice is merely one technique. It's not the end all be all of what transformative practice is about. Also, that while calmness is useful and slowing down the speed of our overly speedy thoughts that push and pull us is definitely useful, and it brings a type of peace. That peace is a constructed state. And if we are attached to it as like the end all be all of what practice is, we're making a mistake, and we're jailing ourselves in an unnecessary jail, because then we have to go through life trying to remain calm all the time, which becomes like a arduous, tiresome project. What about when we have to run through the airport because things just worked out that way? There was an accident on the freeway, even though we supposedly were going to be there 2 hours ahead, and we have to sprint through the airport. Well, how can we be free while sprinting through the airport in a hurry, right? Not being able to breathe slowly and calmly, just as a silly sort of example. But, there's many situations in life where the ultimate meaning of meditation is not sustaining any particular state. That's not the final aim. We're not trying to construct and sustain a particular state. That is an ego-based project. Okay. Various states have their uses, such as the calmness related to tuning into breathing that you were talking about. So we can reap the benefits of that while not feeling like that is the end all be all or the purpose of our life or of meditation. So there are other ways of working with breathing that would be a little lighter that you could experiment with that would not involve controlling the breath, So there are instructions in the first, the Kumne relaxation was originally published as 2 volumes, and then it's been republished as like Kumne Tibetan Yoga as a single volume. But in the early portions of that book, even before the very first exercises, which are numbered, so even before exercise 1, there is a brilliant section about relaxation and breathing that lays out for us ways to relate to the energy of our breathing in a non-manipulative way, where we're not trying to slow it. We're not trying to slow the number of breaths necessarily. You can do that as an exercise, but again, it's actually tiring. If you do that for a long period of time, you're going to get tired and frustrated and irritable if you did that for 8 hours straight, because it's a constructed effort. And there's a different way to relate to breath where we tune into it and we feel it lightly and we don't manipulate it. And then there's even subtler ways to relate to breath where the breath is just happening. The energy of breath is just happening. And by riding the dynamic occurrence of the breath, we become the expression of life. We become the expression of the vitality or the dynamism of time through the breath. We merge with the breath, and the breath expresses the arising of experience moment by moment. And we're not doing anything. We're not breathing. We're just being while riding on the breath in a very kind of subtle way until there's really no us anymore separate from the breath. There's just life happening. So I'm talking about increasingly subtle levels of relating to the breath that involve less and less manipulation. And so I would point you to the first Kumne volume, to the opening first 30 pages there as a brilliant exposition of working with breath. There's also great chapters on breath in Gesture of Balance. Other observations, comments, questions? Anne, please.
I'm currently reading Gesture of Balance, and I'm up to like chapter 6, and in the first few chapters, Rinpoche goes over meditation, and I was surprised that he didn't talk about coming back to the breath and following the breath, because other instructions I've gotten from other traditions, you come back to your breath if your mind wanders off. And then the other thing is, don't count. Other traditions have you counting during meditation. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, following the breath or not following it. Like Rinpoche, from what I detect so far, I'm not done with the book, is he just don't worry about your breath, let it go naturally, and you'll calm down, hopefully, something like that. But like I say, I'm not done with the book.
Yeah, great to hear from you. Wonderful questions. And, I'll say I teach about different Buddhist traditions in an academic context. And before I really found my home within the Indian Tibetan tradition, and especially the Nyingma tradition, because it spoke to me and fulfilled the kinds of things that I was looking for in a comprehensive path, I practiced intensively in other sorts of Buddhist paths, in Theravada and Zen traditions of different kinds, that of different uses of breath in different ways, and are very rich, wonderful traditions. So there's no absolute right or wrong when it comes to these things. First of all, there's different ways, but each sort of system and each, if a teacher is good, and Tarthang Tulku is a good teacher, who's presenting comprehensive system, like based on a lot of knowledge. So any good teacher from any tradition, Zen, Theravada, any of the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, other non-Buddhist traditions, any good teacher, they're going to present a system that has its own kind of integrity and its own sort of internal logic. And it's worthwhile getting a handle on that particular system and how it works, and just bracketing and putting aside for the moment other kinds of instructions and systems, because they can cause a misunderstanding, or they can cause us to not really hear or really read the words on the page. I can't tell you how many times, like, I've realized in reading, say, Gesture of Balance, that for many years I was not reading the words on the page. My mind was imputing other kinds of understandings, and I wasn't hearing what Rinpoche was saying. And I'm sure some of that still is going on. But so knowing these other traditions are great and their instructions have value, mixing them can be a muddle and confusing. So if we're just sticking with what Tarthang Tulku is saying in, say, Gesture of Balance, then one of his concerns, as I understand it, is number one, he does not want people to fixate. He doesn't want people to cling, and he doesn't want people to use the breath as an object of clinging, as an object of fixation. Okay. Later in Gesture of Balance, he's going to say, I'm paraphrasing, but it's a pretty close paraphrase. He's going to say that, concentration, developing some stability of attention, non-distractedness is necessary. But if we concentrate too tightly on the breath or anything else in a kind of obsessive way, then that creates a subject concentrating on an object in a tight sort of structure. And in Gesture of Balance, Tarthang Tulku will say that sort of tighter concentration builds what he calls a shell. That's his word, a shell around awareness. And he clarifies what we want is awareness, which is our natural being. It's not being identified as a particular knowing standpoint. It's not being a self from a certain standpoint. The self is arising within awareness, which is a larger way of being than any particular standpoint or the objects that arise from that standpoint. The awareness is bigger than that. So we would like to be in touch with that bigger awareness. If we fixate and cling through concentration, we build a shell that blocks us off from awareness because of our ego activity of concentrating. So he would like us to develop a concentration that's light, that's not clingy. Because his aim is to introduce us to the awareness that's part of the nature of our being, where all the goodness is. Naturally, it's so great because it's just there. It just flows, right? It's like a plenitude, a superabundance. Just, whoo. So he doesn't want us to block ourselves off from that. And if we overly concentrate, we actually block ourselves off from that. So this is part of his concern. And this is why he is very concerned about instructions in general. And he can say instructions get in the way sometimes. We need some beginning instructions. This is partly what I was trying to say. We need these instructions that give us a starting point for various practices. But then to rest in natural being, we have to let go of all instructions. Because if we're a doer following a set of instructions to get somewhere, we're in this, I'm over here, I'm going to follow these instructions so I can get over there. We're in this, I'm going from here to there. And structurally, it's just all about getting and grasping when we're in that way, if we're following instructions too tightly. Now, don't get discouraged because we need to follow some instructions. It's partly why I was saying at the beginning of my talk, these conceptual practices involving instruction and intention are necessary, but then we have to drop it. We have to drop the instruction and drop the doing and drop into just being for little points of time, just little bits. And then we can go back to a reference point when we start to get like really hazy. The previous question from Nyingma Institute, the person was saying, sometimes they may enter a sort of way of being where things get a little hazy, and it would take more dialogue to discern what's really going on there. It can just be we're losing our self-reference, which is a good thing. We're giving up being a clear knower, knowing something, and it starts to feel a little unhinged, unanchored. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, our mind starts to tell us, wait, I don't exactly know who I am right now or where I am. And our ordinary mind that always wants to know where I am, who I am, gets a little spooked, you know, and says, hold on, you've got to go back to knowing who you are and where you are so that everything's put in its boxes and in order. But little by little, we want to be comfortable increasingly with resting as not knowing who we are, where we are, what's going on, what the world is, so that we can make room for this other way of being to shine forth. Or that sort of haziness can just be a falling into a sort of haziness, a falling into a sort of vagueness or dullness, in which case reinvigorating our attention by bringing it back to a reference point, back to an object of attention lightly could be useful. So like Dan, you're talking about the breath can be useful as a focal point. And in other books like Hidden Mind of Freedom, as well as the Kumne books, then Tarthang Tulku does talk about using the breath as a light reference point to touch base with, right? So if we start to get too unhinged, we can come back to the breath, but lightly, you know. Lightly might mean it's not too tightly. We're not trying to like grab the breath. We're not trying to control it. It might be just paying attention to the in-breath and then totally relaxing with the out-breath, not really paying attention to the out-breath, or paying attention to the out-breath and releasing with the out-breath, and then just letting the in-breath come, not really paying attention to it. These are examples of how we approach a light awareness of breathing, a light mindfulness of breathing, as opposed to a tight, constricted mindfulness of breathing. So I hope that's a little helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent, excellent answer.
Other things on people's minds? Patricia?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it was a really wonderful talk. I appreciate it very much. My question has to do with stuckness, and recently my practice is like becoming almost uber aware of these interwoven stuckness patterns of thought, and of course, with an eye to releasing them. But I have a question about, it feels very conceptual to be stuck in awareness of stuckness. So, how do we work with that in our practice? And is it reasonable to have the desire to accelerate that desire to, become aware of the stuckness, almost like a desire to get past it, but with the awareness of like, that's kind of a silly goal, because it doesn't work that way. So if you could just, I know you've been sort of touching on this throughout, but if you could just reiterate something about working with our awareness of our emerging awareness of our stuckness and our various conceptual patterns.
Gladly. And then I think once I do so, we should probably bring this to an end. I mean, people are staying because they want to stay, but since we've been going about 90 minutes, then maybe we'll end soon after this. And I'm going to broaden out a little bit to your wonderful question and broaden it out to not only just becoming aware of our stuckness, but becoming aware of our difficulties, our pain, our distress, our suffering, our insecurities and frustrations and so on, which is our stuckness, maybe part of that, right? But so on the one hand, you already observed there's this natural wish of we want to get past that painful feeling, that uncomfortable feeling of being stuck or being in distress or being in pain. You know, as we practice, then the difficult side of our patterning comes to the fore. So anger and strong desires and jealousy and anxiety and insecurity and depression and scatteredness, all of these things can emerge more clearly and strongly, intensely in our experience as a result of our practice. These are actually good signs. It means the junk is being dredged up as a natural cleansing process. So good things are happening. However, as you also were kind of implying, it can be a bit much, right? So on the one hand, the wish to be free from our distress and pain is very healthy, and that wish is something we can encourage. This is a key part of the Buddhist path, is we want to become free. Then we also realize other beings are all in the same boat, other people and any beings that feel, which just means a being, something that feels. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel threat and distress. We want to feel secure and happy. And of course, this gets deep because with these kinds of bodies that are dying and have all this pain, how much final security can we feel? But that's a question for another day, you know. But there are all kinds of levels of issues here of getting in touch with this wish to be deeply happy and to really be free from suffering, is to really start to understand that being identified with a body that's subject to pain, as long as we're fully caught and identified as this is I, this is me, we're consigning ourselves to distress. Somehow we're going to need to release that false identification with this sort of painful body as being I and me and mine in order to reach a deeper freedom, right? But be that as it may, when we start to feel our stuckness or just feel the difficulties or we become more aware of the hard patterning of our afflicted states, then on the one hand, yes, we want to be free from them even more. On the other hand, we don't want to bypass. We do need to feel and see what's going on and understand the dynamics of how those states are operating and how the suffering is coming to be, because it's not the appearance of anger or agitation or anxiety that causes us distress. It's our identification as being an experiencer or a self or a knower that's fused with the appearing anxiety or agitation or anger or desire. It's that fusion of being a knower who is having that experience, that identification, that's what's causing our distress. It is completely possible, I promise you, to be feeling intense anger or intense lust or jealousy. That energy can be arising, and if there is not identification in the space of our experience, there doesn't have to be suffering, and that energy can then naturally transform and liberate itself into an underlying form that's not negative, that it was appearing in that negative way as jealousy or anger because we were relating to experience from the standpoint of an ego self trying to own and manipulate. And when we release that identification, the energy of these so-called negative emotions transforms naturally, and the energy is released into something positive. Okay. For example, strong desire starts to reveal itself as a natural appreciation of the particularity and the beauty of each particular arising, right? Without grasping. And anger starts to transform and reveal itself with a type of clarity that mirrors experience more accurately and clearly, the way it actually is taking place, and so forth. These so-called negative emotions actually hide within them positive forms of being or knowing. Okay. This is part of the transformative processes that we talk about in Mahayana Buddhism and then in Tantra. But what I also want to say in relation to Patricia's point is that it can be that it's just like a little too much and counterproductive to be immersed totally all the time in awareness of the pervasiveness of our negative patterning. As we start to see subtler and subtler levels, we start to see that there is confusion, and based on confusion, a type of grasping and a type of pushing away that's happening all the time. And as we see that, it can get a little like depressing or overwhelming of like how thoroughly stuck we are in this sort of confused or what we call samsaric level of mind. Luckily, there's ways out of it through disidentification and analysis. But what I want to say about this is I feel it's very important, and based on the teachings of Tarthang Tulku, to balance that sort of recognition and insight of the stuckness that we're in, to balance that out with the active cultivation and immersion and enjoyment of positive states. I'll say that again. We need a balance. We need to actively cultivate and give ourselves full license to immerse and rejuvenate ourselves with positive, nourishing, expansive states, to then empower us with the bigness of heart and mind, and the expansiveness to then face anew the pervasiveness of our stuckness and be able to address it in useful ways. So this is why in Gesture of Balance that Dan was mentioning, some of the early chapters walk us through ways to get in touch with joy and deep levels of blissful relaxation in our body, breath, and mind, and to expand joyful feelings. This is why one of the very first exercises in the whole Kumne volumes of the Kumne Yoga is called Expanding Feeling. And it's all about using a memory of a positive experience to bring forth and get in touch with a good feeling that we had one time. Let's just say we were hiking in the woods and it was beautiful and the light was shining and we felt really good and we smelt the pine. So we bring that back with memory. Then we focus on the good feeling. We expand the good feeling with our attention through our body, breath, and mind. We drop the memory. We just let the good feeling circulate with our body, breath, and mind. And we immerse in that good feeling and send it out to ourselves and then everywhere. And this is a constructed practice. This is a conceptual practice. But it empowers us with positivity, and then we're better able to face our stuckness. Also, there's more to this. The nature of our being, I've already said, is replete with positive qualities and positive energy. So when in a constructed way we get in touch with joy by utilizing a joyful memory, that joy puts us in touch with, it's like a direct channel to a deeper natural joy that's part of our deeper nature. So on the one hand, we're working with a constructed joy on a surface level, but on a deeper level, that constructed joy is a direct reflection, and it has continuity, sort of going down to the level of our deepest being. There's a continuity between this constructed joy that we develop and soak ourselves in and an unconstructed joy that's already within us, but that is obscured right now. And the more we get in touch with this constructed joy, actually, the more the unobstructed joy can shine forth to the forefront. And he talks about this both in Gesture of Balance and in the Kumne books in the opening sections. So I think that's a really important counterbalance to seeing the depth of our dilemma. Yeah, we need.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. I'll go back to Gesture of Balance and review that. That's great. Thank you so much.
He has a chapter called Healing Through Positive Energy.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So this has been a pleasure, and so appreciate seeing all of you and hearing what's on your minds and being able to dialogue. Yeah, hopefully you find the handout useful when you have a chance to go through it. And you could also always dip into some of the books mentioned there. I mentioned a few like books from Longchenpa in English that are accessible, and who's a great teacher within this tradition, as well as some things by Mipham, and I give you some links online to a short text by Mipham and so forth. So I just want to dedicate whatever positivity we've generated by investigating our situation and our experience and asking good questions, to the continued development of understanding so we can benefit ourselves and all others. And I would like us as a group, I feel there's some energy with a group, and I'd like to bring to mind a particular person. There is a friend of mine, Hayward Fox, who's a longtime student of Tarthang Tulku. He's a psychologist. He's a very wonderful teacher of the time, space, and knowledge teachings, which are like a secular presentation of high teachings developed by Tarthang Tulku. And Hayward Fox is a wonderful teacher of these teachings. He is 80 years old, and he recently got into a really bad car crash, and he broke 17 bones, and he's trying to recover. And I would just like us to send some of the positivity that we've generated, even though we may not know him, but nonetheless, we can just think of him and just wish for his healing in body and mind. And then that's an example of wishing for well-being for everybody, everywhere. Okay? So with that, let's say good night, and everyone take care. I'm going to, Hyun, I'm going to email you my document, and then you can send it out whenever, if it's late for
Yeah,
you.
maybe tomorrow afternoon. I'll
Tomorrow.
send, with the recording. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elon. Bye.
Thank you.